hear me? Thank you very much for being here. But the title of my talk is The Women's Movement in Iran. And this is a big title going 34 years back. So I'm going to be very brief. I'm going to emphasize on three different areas of the women's movement. One is the organized women's movement, then the grassroots movement, and what is against it, and what is actually the situation of women with regard to the law, with regard to education, employment, and social life. In brief, we've had from the beginning of the 1979 revolution, we've had a wide range of grassroots movement, which started right after the revolution, maybe a week after the revolution, by Ayatollah Khomeini's decree of the Islamic way. And that was when thousands and thousands of women, including me, poured on the streets in objection to that decree, which was withdrawn initially and then implemented gradually until it became law. So we had this grassroots movement against the veil, against the freedom to wear whatever you like and to walk on the streets in whatever way you want. Then during the war years, the women's movement was very difficult to get shape. After the war, in the 1990s, we had women's movement beginning to shape by women getting engaged in various NGOs, by publishing magazines, women establishing publishing houses, and maybe Mrs. Carr was one of the first women who worked on a very comprehensive book written by her, and Ms. Shahralahiji, who was the first woman publisher, if I'm right, who had a publishing house about the history of women's movement in Iran. Then we had the Zanaan magazine in those 1990s, which was very instrumental in conscious raising of the women's situation. A lot of women worked and wrote for the Zanaan magazine, including Mrs. Carr, which I remember her articles about the law and women. And at the beginning of the revolution, we had thousands of women getting out of Iran because they were getting out of their jobs, out of their social status with the compulsory veil. They left Iran. We had a lot of research, books, and activities outside of Iran. But throughout the years, what women did outside of Iran was separate from what women did inside of Iran. Gradually, after maybe 20 years of working on two sides of borders, the two movements somehow got together. And that was mainly during the 1 million campaign signature, which women actively attended in Iran when they organized it, and women outside contributed to it as well. During the 2009 presidential elections, there was a wide coalition of women inside and outside to decide what they want from the candidates. They were not supporting any candidates. They never lobbied for any candidate. They just made this very wide coalition and put their demands to the presidential elections, and forced the candidates to actually respond to women's demands, which was very significant, not to say that they could do anything about it. Even Ahmadinejad started talking about women's rights. But unfortunately, after the elections and the election the way we saw it when everything was crushed and Ahmadinejad came out of the ballots. Women's activities somehow was silenced because it was too much dangerous and it wasn't that safe to work on women's issues. So a lot of women activists got out of Iran and scattered around the world, which they still work here and there. But it didn't mean that the women's movement inside Iran died down. It didn't. It still started working, reshaping itself in various ways. We have the Morning Mothers organization, which is consisting of women who, quite a lot of them are Women for Peace movement, some of them are women activists. They are working towards getting justice for their murdered children, but at the same time, they are aware of the women's rights movements. Then we have, if I come back to this canvas that you see here, I'm going to go back to the disadvantages of life in Iran and what the Islamic Republic has done gradually, steadily to the situation of women in Iran. At the moment, what Iranian women are doing inside Iran is working fundamentally on the rights of women, of raising conscious about the women's rights, working on the issues which directly affects women, such as violence in family, violence in the society. Personally, I've worked on violence in Iran, against violence in Iran, so I'm very familiar with what violence is actually in Iran, and I'll speak to you about that very briefly. But what you see in here is part of women's campaigns in Iran under Ahmadinejad, under the current situation. About 3 years ago, the family bill was rewritten and introduced to the parliament, to Majlis, giving men the right to have the second or third wives without the knowledge of the first wife. And that created a lot of chaos and worries among women activists. And giving men sanction to get temporary wives or sire. In order to show to the deputies what devastating consequences these bills would have on women, women activists traveled around Iran and started talking to grassroots women, just ordinary women, asking them, those whose husbands had second wives or temporary wives, asking them of the consequences. They could manage to gather 15,000 signatures, 15,000 stories with names, actual names and addresses. And they gathered all these 15,000 signatures and written testimonies in bags and bags, and they took it to Tehran. They chose 40 stories out of the 15,000 stories, and they put them on this canvas. This is called cheltike, which in Persian means, quilt. Doing quilt, when you make a quilt, you put pieces together and make a quilt. This is like a quilt, but it is made of what has actually happened to women under the law, under the bill that was being introduced to the Majlis, which was worse than the bill that was before, and Mrs. Carr explained about it. So they took the 15,000 signatures, bags of 15,000 signatures, along with to the parliament and gave it to the deputies, and sat there and said, this is the story of women, please stop this bill. The bill so far has shifted between the Guardian council and the parliament several times. Some of the articles have been removed, but it doesn't mean that they've gone away, because the old articles are still there. And the story continues about, you know, the whole family bill, it changes, it hasn't finished, it hasn't, you know, put aside what women actually want. It's still there. The consequences of the policies of anti-gender, anti-women of the Islamic Republic is absolutely devastating, especially for the ordinary women who have nothing to do with politics. They just want to live their lives freely. I've got some statistics here which I will read them to you. First is the rate of suicide among women. It has risen dramatically. Not to say that the rate of suicide among men has not risen. It has risen, both of them. I've got a few figures here. This statistic is from the Ministry of Health, so they are you know, official statistics. According to them, on average, every day between 5 to 10 people commit suicide. Now, the rate of suicide in the first 3 months of this year has been 952, among which 274 have been women, but the majority is men. 678 have been men. Now, in year before, the rate was different. It was 3,000 suicide attempts. And in year 89, which is 2010, it was 3,649 suicide attempts. So we are facing a very high number of suicides, and quite a large number of them are women. Now, why women commit suicide? It's, you know, different reasons. Some of the suicide attempts are very horrendous because women put themselves on fire, and this is just burn themselves alive, and this is mostly in the western parts of the country. That's because of the harassment women get, either due to the violence in the family or outside. Now, in just 1 year, I've got a few numbers here. 113,000 women have been arrested for against moral code. That is what has been, you know, and taken to the courts. Now, at the airports, 80,000 women have been questioned at the airports while they were going outside of Iran. And 128 of them have been prevented from traveling due to the improper dress code. Now, this is one part of the statistic I was giving you. The other devastating effect of policies on women is the establishment and the implementation of temporary